Welcome to Flatfoots and Fools, a podcast about detective games. I'm Andrew, and as usual, John joined me today. How you doing?
Hello. Happy to do this. This is new for us.
Yeah, we are really excited today to welcome Jeremy Johnston and Robin Ward of The Roottrees Are Dead. How are you two doing this fine day?
Good.
Yeah, really good.
All right. Before we dive right into the Roottrees, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a game designer, and before Roottrees, I didn't really work on any detective or puzzle games professionally, but I did work in the industry for quite a long time on other stuff. And so in my spare time and for fun, I enjoyed making puzzle games. And actually, I'll just say just puzzle games because Roottrees is my first detective game. But I participated in the Global Game Jam every year, and the Roottrees Are Dead just happened to be one of the many games I built for the Global Game Jam, and the rest is history.
Yeah, for me, I'm fairly new to game development. I've been a lifelong passionate gamer. Absolutely love them. And I love detective games and mystery games and, excuse me, point and click adventure games, all sorts of games. But I've only really started in earnest in the last 5 years or so. And yeah, really enjoying it so far, having a great time.
Last 5 years have been the best 5 years of it from the detective side.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there was like Obra Dinn came out, I don't know, 10 years ago? That's a rough guess? And
8 years ago now.
8 years ago. A fair amount of time ago. And then there wasn't much. For such an influential game that people still to this day talk about how it's so great, it took people quite a long time to clone it or evolve it or whatever. Like until Golden Idol, I can't think of another game that did it. And that's only a few years old. So,
And I don't really think even that many games have really cloned Obra Dinn. Like I used mechanics from Obra Dinn, but the interface in my game and Obra Dinn are very different. Our game, I should say, are very
yeah.
different than one another. And there's been a couple people more recently that I've begun to see that have done the whole frozen in time aspect of Obra Dinn.
Right.
But generally, even then, it's just been the things inspired by it took a while.
It
So,
did. Yeah. I think Mind Diver is like a 3D time frozen game. I haven't had a chance to play that one yet. But otherwise, yeah, I guess you have the 2D versions, Golden Idol and stuff. But it's interesting. Like that could have come out a year or two after Obra Dinn, and we didn't see it for 5 years. That's really interesting.
The closest I've seen as a direct successor was Utter a Name, which is what if 15 people in a house two-dimensionally, but otherwise the same ideas as Obra Dinn? The frozen snapshots in time,
Mhm.
and you're figuring out everybody's fate.
and when did that come out?
Oh, I want to say 2 years ago, but I could be a little bit off on it.
Okay, so still a while.
Yeah, a while after that.
It just took a while for the world to catch up, I guess.
I mean, it's a hard act to follow. That was a very experienced developer taking 3.5 years of insane work time to do.
Have you watched, I don't know if you've seen it, but just this year, Lucas Pope posted like a time lapse video of him creating all the 3D assets in the game.
Yes, that is an amazing video.
And he talks while he does it. Like it's in fast forward and it's still 3 hours long or something. And he talks about it. And you realize just the tremendous amount of work that this one person essentially did on this game. It's crazy. You could see why we haven't seen an exact Obra Dinn clone, but there's these versions of it that we do know are much faster to make because we've seen it happen. Like since Golden Idol, we've seen a lot of games that have come out like 2D fill in the blank kind of games, like Little Problems, Confidential Killings, stuff like that. And some of those games can be knocked out pretty quickly. So there was like no technical reason why this couldn't have happened, but we're in some kind of, like, as you said, like, I don't know if it's a renaissance or for whatever reason, there's like been a perfect storm of this kind of game in the last few years. And there's just been a ton of them. I think there's always been mystery games. There's always been point and click games. There's always been room escape, explore a mansion, those kind of games, which do have a lot in common with the genre, but not that lock-in mechanic,
Yeah, and especially not the nice integration of the puzzles being the story and like your comprehension of the story is how you solve the puzzle. Like I think that's one of the new things that her story and Obra Dinn really, like, that was their core in a way I don't think anyone else has done really. You could argue maybe the Ace Attorney series, but that's also set up to be a different style of game as like a literal playable mystery novel.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess that's the other thing. Like we've talked a lot about Obra Dinn, but Roottrees is obviously like the way I've always thought of it was like Obra Dinn and Her Story, kind of a marriage of those two games. And Her Story is also quite old, and we haven't seen.
I think 11 years old, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes, that one was 2015.
So that one's FMV, and we've started to see some other database ones, like Archives of Travosa works on the same principle, which I believe you were involved in, Buck.
Yes, I was the junior writer and designer on that one.
You did not tell me that.
I mentioned it briefly. It was in the middle of a lot of other stuff.
So in that title, there's a limit to how many results you get. And that mechanic is directly from her story, right?
Definitely our chief inspiration there. Now, and that sort of transitions into another question I had was like Obra Dinn and her story. They're both credited as major inspirations for the game. But yeah, they both focus on either information analysis or the investigative process really intensely. And just about any other detecting game I'm aware of before the Roottrees has followed suit by really focusing on one thing. What really inspired the blend of those two in a very balanced way?
I think it was mostly a matter of what I had the ability to make. So it's probably no secret that the mechanics and the database behind Roottrees is very simple. You type something in, and behind the scenes, it's really just looking up if what you typed in matched any of the things that I've set up in advance. And if they do, then you get results. And if they don't, then you get something that says there's no results or no relevant results. And that's pretty much the main mechanic of the game. And that came from the fact that, again, it was a game jam game. So I built it for the global game jam. I had to build something that I could do very quickly. And the part of that sentence that, if you want to read behind the lines, is something that I could do very quickly. I'm not very good at programming. Robin is the programming expert. I am just the guy that makes a database where you type in a word and some other words come out, maybe.
But I want to say something about that because you guys all have game design experience, and I work at a college and my degree's in history. And I really enjoyed this game because you're essentially a researcher. And when you just said about you punch in a word in a database and it pulls it up, like that's pretty much my day job, investigating things and making like a clue board and stuff like that. So it's very akin to real life when it comes to researching stuff.
I would say that it's inspired by real life in a way that the fun of search engines, if you can call it that, is that if you type something in and you find what you're looking for, it's a good moment. And if you don't find what you're looking for, you're not going to click any of those links. So we kind of distilled the idea of a search engine down to just the core element of how you would actually use it. You know, most people aren't going to search for something that they're looking for and go, oh, these results look bad. I'm still going to click on every single one and read them. Why would you do that? So instead, you know, and again, this comes directly from my technical limitations. Instead of making a bunch of results that are important, and also the time limitations from a designer standpoint, I kind of sum up what you'd see in sort of a text adventure kind of way, really, you know, where it says, okay, this is what you found, this seems not relevant, it's relevant, etc. But yeah, most of that came from the idea that it's technically easy to create, and it is based on my using of search engines specifically to find trivia. So every year I participate in a trivia contest. That trivia contest involves a lot of frantic Googling.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. And so that, I would say, is the main design inspiration behind searching for obscure facts on a fake internet, is that often 30 hours during a really long trivia contest, I'm searching for real facts on the real internet.
Yeah, I can't leave what Jeremy said there about him being a bad programmer, because I always have to qualify. Like, I think a good programmer is someone who ships something and finishes something. And even though I think in the remastered Rootrees, the Steam Rootrees, we did improve a lot of aspects of the UI, like it was still kind of a one-to-one game. Like you still made it fully work. And I also wanted to say that even though technically a database that's easy, like even if you're just learning to program, like you're a beginner, you could probably make a database that, given a search term, returns a result if there's a match. Like that's not that hard. But Roottrees isn't like a technically difficult game, but it's like a conceptually difficult game. And there's like a lot of content to write. And I think one of Jeremy's skills is that you could just produce a ton of text. Like he's really good at writing.
Yes, I can. Sometimes to my detriment.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we have an internal forum and sometimes it goes on a bit long and I'm like, I wish there was less text. But like, honestly, it's way better than when someone doesn't write anything. You know what I mean? I like it when people participate. But for Roottrees, that's like kind of a match made in heaven, right? Because what you have to do is you have to start with a small concept and you have to fill in the blanks. You want to write this material in a way that it's interesting to read, and that when you find a search result that's a dead end, it's obvious it's a dead end, but it's also interesting. And I did a little bit of this for Roottree Mania. I wrote some of the articles, some of the edge ones, and I had a lot of fun doing it, but I realized like, oh, this is hard. It's really hard to write in this particular way. So I think that's actually the challenge of the Rootrees design, is not like other games might rely more on a technical challenge, but this game relies more on like that kind of conceptual and writing challenge.
I mean, with the Roottrees, the writing is the puzzle. And so it's not a separate thing from the puzzle design. You have to be doing both at once, which I think adds an extra layer onto that challenge.
I was going to say some of the puzzle is on the tree too, right? It's the structure of the tree, and because people can only fit in certain places. So it's often about finding the thing, but it's also about fitting it in. But that's a very minor difference.
Yes, I would agree, but I would say that most of it does come in the writing. I don't remember the exact context of where this came up, but I joked a lot while writing it that a lot of the design of Roottrees was finding interesting ways to bury the lead, where I put the key piece of information into an article in a way where I'm trying to make you not see it as the key piece of information. I don't want it to stand out, go, this is what's important. Now, sometimes it was okay to do that. But oftentimes, if I wanted a puzzle to be harder, I'd have to find a way to give you context around something as opposed to just stating it outright, because that's more interesting. You know, you read through this, you look for the context clues that lead you to the types of things you know that you want to know, like what people's jobs are, what they look like, what their first last names were before they got married, things like that. And so that was a lot of the design initially of how I was trying to hide puzzles, was how can I interestingly say something without saying it outright.
That worked quite well. I definitely missed multiple of those that, in retrospect, yeah, it was there the whole time.
Attention is an interesting resource, right? Like the stereotype is, the kids these days, they just scroll on the TikToks and they can't think of anything for more than a few seconds, But Roottrees has a tremendous amount of text, as I mentioned. Like I think it's like 105,000 words, which is like longer than a lot of books. And you don't have to read all of it. And I think a lot of players do skim, but it's a game that you can't really skim everything. Like you kind of have to pay some amount of attention to it. Like that's part of the game. And you might think, well, like in this day and age, who would want to play a game like that? And it turns out a lot of people. Like, I do respect the people who are like, oh, I'd never play a game that involves so much reading. I just want to just sit there. I want to log in with my friends and just shoot things online or whatever and talk while doing it. And I get that. But there's a certain kind of player out there who's like, I want to stretch that attention. Like, I want to pay attention to these words and I want to make the words matter and really internalize them. The Roottrees is a game for those people.
Absolutely.
If I see a review that's like, why does everyone like this game? It's just a bunch of text. I'm like, yeah, that checks out.
Yeah, it's fair.
As an educator, I know, man. How do I get these kids to read?
Well, I don't know how you make someone read, but
You hook them in with a story, like you guys did.
yeah, it has to be fun. There has to be a reward for doing it. I've certainly played games that I just think, even though I like reading and I read a lot in my spare time and stuff, like I do find some games are just, oh, this is too much text. Like I'm not getting the same. Like when I first played the itch.io version of Roottrees, I was like, I was never bored. I was never like, actually, you know what? I'm going to say something. I wasn't bored, but I do remember the first session I really played the game when I got into it. And when I unlocked Lauren's diary, you get like, I think 5 pages the first time. And it was late at night and I was in a different time zone. And I was just like, I can't read this right now. Like I'm tired, like I have to, like other games I get tired in different ways, but this way I was just like, I can't process this. But the good news is like Roottrees isn't meant to be played in one sitting. I think you did though, didn't you, Matt?
I'm looking at my notes and then it says, I am full of regret from this game because I started at 10 p.m. and I quit at 3:30 in the morning. And I was just so fried in my day job.
I'm sorry.
It's like, I just wanted to go home.
Is that the true purpose that you've invited me onto this podcast so that I could apologize to you?
No, it was great. Although I will also say, as most of the time I go into these games completely blind, and the first line I think I have is, oh, it's not about trees, but family trees. I was like, oh, it's not a murder mystery. This is not what I expected. But I had a great time.
Yeah, that's funny. I don't want to say it was intentional, but I definitely didn't shy away from calling the game something that's a little bit misleading.
What you said earlier about burying the lead and everything, it gives a continuity to that idea.
Yeah, the name of the game I would say, does strike the idea that this will be either a murder mystery or there'll be some
Mhm.
foul play involved. And then the first thing that happens at the beginning is that there's a plane crash. And a lot of people go into the game with the expectations like, okay, I have to figure out what caused this plane crash.
Right.
And then what I decided to do is, there's something to be said about real life oftentimes has a lot of people that want to think that it's like fiction. There's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, the moon landing must be fake. And I think where some of those conspiracies come from is that people like media, and media is a lot more interesting typically than real life is. It's kind of like the idea of main character syndrome, right? People, they experience so much media, books, movies, TV shows, or whatever, and all of those things follow these certain patterns that revolve around the way that we tell stories as humans. And so people start internalizing that, and they like to think that, oh, there's these things out there that are going on that are just like the things in movies. And it might be because we're so good at pattern recognition. I'm not sure. This is a topic for someone who's definitely not me and has a lot more idea about how brains work. But if I had to speculate, a lot of that leads to people thinking, oh, something deeper must be going on. And for me, real life is just as interesting once you kinda get past that. You're like, "No, everyone out there in the whole world all have the same kind of consciousness and individualism and feelings about how their own world revolves around them as I do." And so, just kinda getting peeks into those lives is just as interesting as if people were assassins or, sabotaging planes to bring them down or whatever you wanna say could have been happening behind the scenes in a game called The Roottrees Are Dead. It doesn't need to be that way.
You could have a fun DLC expansion, the NTSB mode.
It's funny that you say that because I think that there's a YouTube channel called Mentor Pilot. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it, but
Yes.
it's a channel where this pilot who is an instructor pilot, he helps run simulators and things like that. He goes over NTSB reports. I think he posts once a week. He takes an incident of some kind and he really dives down deep into it and things like that. And I have to say that I don't really watch that show, but my girlfriend watches it every week for years, and I think that just me kind of experiencing it through her is a
Mm.
lot of where the beginning incident of the Roottrees Are Dead came from.
I do love that news report.
That's why I chose a plane crash.
You said that was a YouTuber?
Yes, Mentor Pilot. It's Mentor spelled the European way, O-U-R, Mentor.
I watch a lot of pilot debrief stuff, so I get it.
He's very, very technical, and he's very, very good at explaining things. Just for me, I don't like listening to a bunch of plane crash stuff all the time. It's a bit morbid, and also he's a very technical person, so you have to be very interested in aviation in general. But he's very good at what he does, and his videos have very high production quality. And so, like I said, she would be watching that, and I'd be watching it with her or hearing it in the background. And I do think if you in the game, the inciting incident of a plane crash, if you search for plane crash right off the bat, I thought more people were going to do that because that's kind of what I expected people to do. And so there's still, if there's any way in the game to sort of bypass or sequence break, that's probably the way to do it. Is if you just search plane crash right off the bat, it gets you to some of the deeper stuff immediately because in my original design, I expected everyone to do that. And then when they didn't do that, I had to sort of improvise and find other ways to get to that information.
And speaking of getting people started, like this game has, like you mentioned, an entire book worth of writing. I imagine getting people traction on the giant tree seems like a pretty difficult challenge. So how did you sort of identify and handle the challenge of getting people started once the full game opens up?
Oh, okay. Once the full game opens up, so let me talk just
Yeah.
quickly about the tutorial because that tutorial has pretty much been there since the very beginning of the Three Sisters, and I figured that that would be kind of a way. There is so much text in the game, but I wanted to create something that felt relatively contained. So that tutorial where you really only need to look at three articles and maybe one piece of evidence, I think was always there as the first time user experience. And then
Mhm.
after that, it did originally open up to just endless information. Like, I consider it kinda like switching from a tutorial to an open world game immediately, and that situation and the data that you find yourself exposed to right after the tutorial, that's probably the thing that changed in the design the most. The stars on the tree the most notable Roottrees wasn't there when I first built the game. I didn't think they were necessary, and I still don't. If you were to take those stars away and people were to just look at the notable Rootrees list has always been there from the beginning, but they didn't have stars associated with the people in the tree. Every single one of those notable Rootrees was designed in a way that even if you didn't have the stars, you could still place them. I'm very confident of that. I could go through them as individual examples one at a time, but that's probably not that interesting. But if you really think about it, if you've played The Roottrees Are Dead and you'd like to go back through it and find an interesting sort of challenge, think about if those stars weren't there, how you do it, and you might be able to see that the tree was designed in such a way to allow you to do that. I'll do one example. Lauren, when you first look into her, it becomes very clear that she has 3 younger brothers. That's told to you right away. And there's literally only one spot on the tree with 4 siblings, so you immediately know where she goes. Another really quick example is Miracle Roottree Jr. He's the son of the youngest 5-piece. So once you know where the 5 pieces are, you know that they go left to right from oldest to youngest. You know what side of the tree he's on. And once you find out that he has a son with a wife, there's only one spot he can go. And all of them are like that, all the initial notable Rootrees. I thought that would be enough because I was giving people a piece of paper that said, hey, look at these people first. But even though I did that, there was a whole lot of other factors that were stopping them from doing that. The biggest one, which I haven't removed, is that when you're going through the tutorial, you get some information about other people kind of built in. You get information about the 3 sisters' father and mother. And so that creates a moment where people have some information kind of left over from the tutorial and they want to place it. One of the solutions I probably could have done was remove that information about their parents, but it doesn't feel very natural. That's the other thing I'm kind of balancing against is if you're looking up these 3 sisters and also their parents died in the same crash as them, it'd be very unnatural for me to try and find a way to design the text in such a way that you still don't get any information about their parents. And so kind of building all of this against itself, what information am I going to give you? So the approach I took instead was constantly, I think, 3 iterations of try and get people to look at this list of notable people. So first it was a list of notable people, and you got a bunch of other evidence, and it just said start here on the notable people. The second thing I did was remove all the other evidence. So all the mail that you get from Carl Roottree's office, all of that is pushed to later in the game. I created a cutscene where someone brings it to you just so I could make it so that you didn't start with it. That still wasn't enough. People still weren't looking into the notable Roottrees. The next thing I did was the stars. I put stars on the tree, and I put a star on the notable Roottrees paper, and that still wasn't enough. So finally, the last step that was finally enough was that after you finish the tutorial, there's this cutscene that takes about 10 seconds where I show you the stars appear on the tree, one at a time. I move the camera, show a star, move the camera, show a star, move the camera, show a star. So I give you that information that, like, hey, these are the people. Look at these people. For the love of God, look at these people. And it was finally enough. But it took a lot of iterating to get to that point.
A literal dangle shiny object in front of people's eyes.
I remember actually when we were discussing the Steam version, anytime I would mention something about like, oh, let's make the notable, like, I think it's a bit in your face. Let's just make it a little more subdued. You were so strong. You were like, no, this has to be like this. You're like, trust me, just trust me on this. It has to be like that. Because honestly, that first cutscene, it's not the first cutscene in the game. It's like the first, once you've solved the tutorial cutscene, it does feel a bit long. And it feels like, and you're flying around and it's disorienting in a way because like the camera's moving all across the board and stuff. But it's like, but I get why, I do think though, now that you're saying this, like there are some options in the Steam version. One, you can turn off intuition, and one, you can disable the ability to search all periodicals at once. That makes the game more challenging. I kind of wish we had added an option to not show the stars on the tree, just to like, this is the pro mode of the game, or this is the detective mode.
Librarian mode.
The problem is I think that when people first get to those stars, it's way too early for them to make that call. I would argue.
Yeah. It is annoying sometimes, like, as a gamer, when I play a game and I start and the game immediately asks me to make decisions about difficulty, because it's like, I've just started the game. I don't know how hard the game is, like, let's figure this out later, but because you're just not in a position to know.
but you don't know enough.
You don't know what you don't know.
Mhm. Like, the intuition itself, I think that's the first time I've seen anything like that. Where did the inspiration for that one come from?
That came from Outer Wilds. Thanks, Outer Wilds.
Ah.
So there's an evolution of the intuition system. I'm assuming you guys have played Outer Wilds.
I have not.
All right.
I've gotten partway into it, but I have issues with my Switch that I need to fix.
That's fair. Outer Wilds has a murder board. I mean, I call it a murder board because of only murders in the building. I don't know if it was ever called a murder board before that. Maybe it was.
Might be a pin board or a cork board, but everybody means a murder board.
Yeah, I said murder board earlier, just talking about like just being a librarian and stuff. So yeah,
But the murder board in Outer Wilds is very location based. You know, there's all the locations in the game. When you visit them for the first time, they appear on the murder board. And something that they did that was fantastic, in my opinion, is because it's such an open world game with so many mysteries, they can't tell you what you're missing. What they do is they just mark something that says there's more to explore here if you haven't found something there. And so that there's more to explore here. It doesn't give you much information to go on, but it just gives you enough that you should go back and start looking for what you missed. And that was the original intuition system. I flipped it around because I thought for a detective game, it would be nice to know when you're done with something. So instead of there's more to explore here, I had it on a piece of evidence. When you were done with it, it said you don't have to look at this anymore. Now, the problem with my game and that system was that it took a while for that icon to ever appear on anything because there's a lot of connections, little connections from here to this piece of evidence to this piece of evidence, just to this one line that can help you find this other person. So I added that to the game, and by the time anyone saw it, it was really far in, and they weren't paying that much attention to this icon that I put on the screen. They wouldn't really notice it, honestly. So then I switched it to, I believe it became, I'm trying to remember the evolution of it. I participated in a 30-day project where you give updates on a project you're working on for 30 days. And during that time, I was working on Roottrees the first time. And so during that time, I wrote up a document about how the intuition system evolved. I think that maybe the next thing was just numbers, that numbers that just led to information about the people you were missing. So if you were missing someone that this thing could link to, it would have a number there for that person. And then what that did was the opposite of what I needed it to, because you wouldn't know that it was trying to tell you the people. Then the next evolution was that I realized that a lot of times evidence, what's important about it was that it leads to more evidence. And so the end version of the system put a bigger focus on evidence that helps you find evidence. A good example of that is in Lauren's diary, there is one page. It's called Clark, and there's an extraordinarily high number on that page. You know, every other thing has like a 3 or a 4 for intuition, maybe a 6 at the most, and this one starts something like a 12 or 13. That all came from a very specific need that this particular page leads to something else that leads to a lot of other things. So it becomes almost a recursive system of how intuition works. So you need to know that you're missing something here. And that just evolved over time from there's something you're missing to there's a few things you're missing to there's things that you're missing. That means that you're missing more things because you're missing this thing. And that's kind of the evolution, how the system worked.
I am really impressed by how elegantly it lets a player know where to focus efforts and is an amazing tool for when you have to take a break and you can't get back to the game as quickly as you'd like to. When you pick it up again,
what breaks?
yeah.
I do think for most people, the best way to play the game is with breaks. I think it is. I don't recommend playing it once.
I also agree with you on that. But the hint systems also was very great.
The hint system, that wasn't in my version. That was a Robin original.
Yeah, we added that for the Steam version. For hints on the original, it was like come to the Discord and ask, right? And this was something we discussed like pie in the sky before we even signed a contract, just as we were saying like, well, what could this game be? I was like, I think it should have hints. And I think if I recall, you might have been on the fence, but you came around pretty quickly.
You convinced me very easily because I think you should go into your philosophy on hint systems.
Yeah, so I didn't invent this, but I was lucky enough to have lunch with one of my heroes, Ron Gilbert, the designer of The Secret of Monkey Island.
Oh, such a good game.
He's made a lot of good games. And he said that if you don't have a hint system in your game, the internet is your hint system. Like, you're not stopping people from asking for hints, you're just making it more difficult. And I'm not saying that any amount of friction is not bad. Sometimes you introduce friction into games and that's good. But the thing is, if you've ever looked up a hint on the internet for a game, and I assume we all have, you'll often stumble upon things that you'll read ahead.
Yeah, you didn't mean to find.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you Google things, the internet doesn't know what you know. It just knows, and you have an idea of what you're searching for, but you might be searching for something out of order or something. So the benefit of having it built into the game is the game has full access to the state of the game. And it knows. It knows what you found and it knows what you've seen. So when you get a hint in the Roottrees are dead, we're basing that based on the current state of the game. So you're not going to get a hint that skips ahead. You're going to get a hint that hopefully leads you in the direction of finding more stuff. And we did iterate on this. Actually, we did a lot on Roottrees. We iterated quite a few times. And we ended up with a system which is basically like, well, first, if they have some evidence they haven't looked at, tell them to look at that, because that's a very basic thing. And not every player does that. But once they've done that, it's like, what could we tell you that will lead to more evidence? Because in general, having more evidence to sift through will give you more material. So we prioritize that. And then after you have all the evidence, it's like, well, are there any articles? And then eventually people. So you'll eventually get to the point where it does help you fill in particular entries on the tree, but you have to keep going. And a lot of people like it. And it's interesting. Like, if you look at other games like our peers have made that are really good games, like sometimes they have delays and stuff like that. In our game, I always thought like, oh, let's maybe make you wait 30 seconds or something like that. But he just never bothered to implement it. I was like, let's just trust the player. Like, it's weird to me to say as a game, you should stop the player from ruining their own experience. Like, I like giving the player the choice to ruin their own experience if they want. If they want to mash the hint button, I don't know that it's the game's job. Like a very concrete example, it's like I've been playing through the Seventh Guest remake that just came out on Steam. And one cool thing about it is it's got some puzzles I don't like just some styles I don't like. And I'm colorblind, so I actually can't do color puzzles that well. And it has a nice feature where you get these in-game coins and you could redeem them to skip a puzzle. So when I got to the 2 color back-to-back puzzles, I just skipped them. And the first one I spent a coin, and the next one it's like you have to wait 5 minutes before spending another coin. And I'm like,
Oh,
for me as a colorblind person,
Oh man.
it doesn't matter. Like, I know I want to skip the puzzle. Let me be smart enough to skip my own puzzle. You know what I mean? It's like this idea that like all the players are something like gambling addicts, or, I just got to skip. I just got a hint. I don't know. I don't know that that's actually true. I think we've made up this is becoming a rant now, but I do think we've made up this arbitrary thing that you got to slow them down, because otherwise everyone's just going to ruin the game. And we watched a lot of people play these games, and that's just not the truth. Like, in fact, with our latest game, people have done a lot to avoid using a hint. Like, they'll do whatever they can to not use a hint. They're just,
Very much.
and when you pop up the notebook in the new game, it says there's no penalty for this at all. Never. Nothing will be affected by using a hint. And people are still like, hints are toxic. I don't want to do it. And that's cool. That's like you making up your own rules. But I think that is a good example of why does the Seventh Guest have the 5-minute limit? Like, was there a tester that they saw? I assume no. I assume the designer just said, this is a thing we need to do, and then did it.
Yeah, even the coin system that you mentioned is, what if I run out of coins? If I run out of coins, then what do? I just go on the internet and look up the answer anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
as soon as you open up that web page, you're being taken out of the game experience and you
yeah.
lose something.
Yeah.
I want to say about the hint system though. I really appreciate the reminder at the beginning. So like, yeah, you're not going to get penalized for it, because like a lot of guys, I didn't want to use any hint systems. I want to just power through it, figure it out on my own. But at like 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm brains fried, I was like, I'm going to use the hint. And it was really amusing, especially when the duck reminds you like, yo, you sure you want to do this? Like, I'm about to tell you a lot. And I was like, no, I could do it. And then, when 3 o'clock hit, I was like, yeah, no, it's time. It's time to ask for help. And I wouldn't have really used it. And I feel like I would have missed out on an amusing experience.
Yeah, so the hint system was heavily inspired by, for me anyway, I think that Robin and I talked about a few different things, but a long time ago, I played through all the Myst games. And there's a website, it's called the Universal Hint System.
Oh yeah, I've used that for a couple games.
There's probably other websites that have done this before, or other people that have done this before. But the way that the Universal Hint System worked is they had sort of a large outline of a lot of questions about the game that were common questions that that people would ask. And then when you clicked one and you dove down into one, I should say. When you dove down into one of those, then it would give you hints in a very gentle kind of, each one would open up to the next one with the most basic thing you could do, like, did you look at this thing? Because if you didn't look at this thing, then you don't even have the information that you needed to solve the puzzle in the first place. But okay, did you look at this thing? Did you notice this thing? Did you notice that it matched something else somewhere? It wouldn't even tell you what it matched. It's kind of these unfolding hint system to give you just enough for you to still be able to make that connection yourself when you got to the one little tiny piece that you hadn't realized yet. And I loved that. It was so wonderful to be able to play through the Myst games like that, because the Myst games, they came out a long time ago. There were some things in them that were not ideal. Like, they were not
Yeah.
smooth, I guess. There's a lot of friction. The calling something in a game like this friction, that actually comes directly for me from Cyan, which are the people that made the Myst games. Puzzles they call friction. And so there's a lot of friction in those games that's maybe a little bit too frictiony.
Yeah, that was the first video game I played.
Missed?
Yep.
First one ever?
Oh.
I believe so. It's the first one I can recall playing.
That's a heck of a first game to start with.
My parents weren't big into video games growing up, but we had the Myst series, and my dad and sister played it, and of course I wanted to as well. So I got to, I think when I was 6. I did not do well at it. I
Yeah.
think that
Oh, of
goes without
course.
saying.
I think that, I probably was 10 or 11 when I played it for the first time, and I did not do well either. But you do just well enough to realize that this world feels like a real world. You're in this world, and there's so many cool things going on. And then you get to the sound maze, and you hate your life because you're a kid. You don't like what's going
Yep.
on. That's a pretty universal. But that's the point that I'm saying is that those games, they had to invent a lot of stuff. So some of the things they invented didn't work as well as some of the other things they invented for immediate understanding of how things work. And so these universal hint system websites were awesome for that. And so when we went to create the hint system in Roottrees, I believe I definitely showed an example of that. And we tried to make our hint system unfold in the same way, for better or worse.
And it worked really well.
A piece of history is like, I'm a bit older than Jeremy, and I grew up with like the old Sierra games that were notoriously hard. And with the text part, even before the point and click versions where you had just, you walked a person around the screen like King's Quest and you had to type in things. And those had hint books that you could send away for. And I've often thought, like, if you play those games, some of them are very unforgiving and very
Oh my God,
difficult.
they're so hard.
And I think a lot of it is that if the game, they were expensive. Like, if you adjust for inflation, they're probably as expensive as, we say, oh, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be $80 or whatever. That's so expensive USD. But like, they were that expensive if you adjust for inflation, and they had to fit on 1 or 2 floppy disks. So they couldn't give you that much content. So to make it last a long time, they made the puzzles really difficult. But then they found out the side hustle of like, we can sell hint books or have a hint line that we
Oh my
charge
God,
you.
yeah.
And
Ooh.
once they realized that, then there was no incentive. The incentive was to keep the games hard because they had this secondary stream of income. So I don't think it's like entirely like, when we look back at these old games, you mentioned friction, that it was entirely like, oh, they didn't know better. That's not to say that like game design hasn't improved, but like they knew how difficult these were for the average person and stuff like that. But I just think that, there was a lack of incentive. But the main reason I brought this up actually was like, I actually did have to get the hint book for King's Quest 2 because I found the game impossible. And even still, like, when I think back at what you had to do in King's Quest 2, like, it's just so hard. And it followed the universal hint system. The hint book came with like, like one of those little red see-through plastic slides. And then you can use it to read text that's blurred out. So it would say like a question, and then you'd slide it down, step 1, step 2. And that was their way of stopping you from reading ahead, which I thought was quite clever. But I think the universal hint system actually was based on those old hint books.
That would make sense. I don't know the origins of them, because by the time I got to playing all the Myst games, I played that first one when I was a kid and I didn't get very far.
Yeah.
But by the time I was able to play through all of them, the internet was in full swing by then. And I just played them all back to back to back, essentially. And so it would make sense that the people who built the websites would go based on what worked.
Yeah, it's a nice way to do it.
It's a really good format, especially for a non-linear puzzle game.
But now games we feel like should be beatable without having to resort to buying a hint book in general. Maybe there's some sickos out there that are like, I want the hardest game ever that's impossible to beat. But most people actually want to be able to beat it themselves with minimal hints.
The other system I really loved is the note-taking system. Because there's been a ton of games that I've played that allow you to take in-game notes, but they're never particularly useful because usually it's a cumbersome user interface. it's not as good as just having a notebook on your desk or even a notepad on a second screen. It's just that much easier to do. This was one of the first games that I was like, oh, this is really good. And it has quality of life features that really impressed me. How was that developed and iterated?
Thank you. I'm gonna let Robin speak about that because a lot of the notebook in the original game was just text.
It was interesting though, because like I did use it a lot. The notebook, like you mentioned, it was like essentially it was just pages. Did you get 10 pages, 5 pages?
In the first one,
Yeah.
I think it might have been 7 or 8 or something.
Oh, okay. But they were each, it was a text field that you could just type in free form text. Actually, the game even recommended, if I recall, that you copy and paste. It was like use Control C.
Yes, I knew that the game was very heavily text-based, so I just made sure that the notepad would let you copy and paste to the in-game notepad. And that was what I thought would be by far the most important thing is, okay, so you don't have to write everything down. You can just copy the things that you wanted to remember.
So at the top of the call, I said, like, I don't have much game experience, but my history before that was, I've spent 20 plus years as a software developer, primarily building web applications and things like that. And I do like UI work, and I really appreciate when a game or anything, like a website or an app on a phone, has a really good UI. And when I say good UI, for me, I'm not strictly speaking about how it looks. Like, is it pretty? Like, although I do like that, it's more about how it works and how it feels and is it intuitive. So like I care a lot about that. So whenever I'm trying to approach a problem, like when you're given an interesting problem, which is like, okay, the Roottrees, this is already a good game. It's already getting a lot of attention. It's already fun, but like, how would I improve it? And that's a different type of challenge than, building something from scratch. So I had played Roottrees, and I had copied and pasted a lot. And I realized like this is a very common thing for me to do, is to highlight, copy, and then paste in. So like the obvious thing to do was copy a feature from the Discourse forum software that I'd previously co-founded. And it's like, if you highlight something, it should just pop up. This is the easiest. The first thing, which is pop up a context menu and say like, either search for this in Spider Search or put it in my notebook. And that saves a bunch of keyboard presses, the Control C, the Control V, or whatever. But like when we were just spitballing in the initial call, I remember saying to Jeremy, I'm like, well, what if you're copying from a page? I know that connection. Like I know the page that's from. So when I put it in the notebook, I can have that bidirectional. I can show that in a more rich format. And then I can also say, well, like take me back to the page where I saw this, right? And that's very useful because you couldn't do that in the original game. Like I guess you could put down the search terms, but I don't know if you watched a lot of playtests of this, Jeremy, but like when people put things in the notebook, I don't think they normally said, I got to this by typing in XYZ. They'd have to just kind of remember.
Nope. In fact, the opposite. They go, where did I see that again?
Yeah.
And then they would have no way to get back there.
So that's kind of where that came from. And there was more iterations, but there's challenges with that too. Like the freeform text is really nice. Like from a programming point of view, it solves a lot of problems. Like you can move things around easier. People generally know how to edit text. So like things like in the notebook allowing you to rearrange required extra thinking. How do I move a note from one page to another? When it's a piece of data, that's a lot. The game has to have like an in-game way of doing it. But it was all an evolution of that. And it was like, we did this all throughout the game. It was like pretty much every interface we thought about, and there's several in the game, is like, how can we make this more smooth? Another one I'm quite proud of is like the filtering for names. In the original version, it was just a drop down of every name. Now, I say every name, that's not true. Jeremy did remove the names you had already placed on the tree. So the drop down got smaller, but when you started the game, it was a pretty small font for me, at least on my laptop. And it was like, is it 50 names? I don't know. It's a lot of names.
I think it's 50.
Yeah, 50 names in there. And then it's like, it's tricky to find them. So, allowing the fuzzy text filtering, like people just will try things instinctually. Like if you click on a name and it pops up, just focus on that box to let me filter. And then when I hit enter, pick the one I'm over, and without ever explaining that to a user, you just see in tests that that's just what they do, because that's kind of how they expect software to work based on other software they've used. So I think a lot of this stuff like is actually not that complicated. But a lot of games don't do it. And I think it comes down to is just like it's time consuming. And there is a desire as a programmer, and like I'm guilty of this too, to be kind of lazy and just be like, oh, it's good enough. I want to move on. So you have to kind of force yourself to just spend more and more time. And then you build an interface that works, but then no, this isn't the best version of that. We're going to come back and we'll do it 3 or 4 times by the time the game launches in order to just get it to work really well. So by the time testers have it, you've already made it work the way you think is really smart. And then, just your internal team has all liked it. And everyone's like, this is really great. Then you throw it in the hands of some testers. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh God, this is broken in so many ways. And now I have to fix that too. But it's a ton of work. And I appreciate that you were like, I noticed the notebook is good because, like I said, it was a lot of work and I'm proud of it. And I think it makes the game stand out. But the thing about this is if you do a really good job, is like people don't even notice. They're just playing the game, you know? The best UI is the one that doesn't make you think, just gets out of the way, and then they're solving the game on their own, you know? When the UI is frustrating, they notice, but when the UI is good, they ignore it.
I loved the bidirectionality on that one because I would do that exact thing of put what I think is important piece of information in the notes, and then an hour later realize, oh, there was something else on that page that I wish I had written down. And it was very easy to just flip back to your note, go to that page, and you're good.
Yeah.
You removed bad friction.
Yeah. That's true. I guess there's good friction and bad friction.
That's subjective somewhat, but in my opinion, that was bad friction that was removed.
Yeah. So one final thought about all this UI stuff is that like when I started working with Jeremy, I was like, you're the designer of this game. Like you designed all the puzzles. You made the first version. You made the proof of concept that people liked. Like you're the designer. But at a certain point, Jeremy said like, well, I think you've contributed a lot. You should also get a designer credit. And I really appreciated that. Even though like most of the time I was not designing puzzles, although we did run puzzles by each other. But if you're talking about strictly the base Roottrees are dead game, you know, it's pretty much the same game as it was
There were
on
very
it.
few things that changed
Yeah.
puzzle-wise, maybe like 2 or 3 at the most, and they're really small changes.
But when the game is like so UI focused, there is a lot of design that is the way you play the game, right? I don't know if you've heard the joke that like all games are either menus or parkour. Every game we make is menus. It's just all menus. So the design of the menus and the way those menus work is part of the game design. Now it's not like I would understand it, you know, in other games they don't give credit to someone who did that work, but I was very thankful that Jeremy gave me that credit. Like I took it because I'm like I agree this does contribute to the quality of the game. I'm not going to say it's equal because I think the actual puzzles and writing are the really important thing, but it is important.
I think I'll have one last question before we get into the spoiler part. Go ahead, Mav.
So I know you guys both get asked a lot about AI aspects of development. And as I've mentioned before, we're like working at college, we're constantly debating AI's place in education in the workplace. So I really wanted to applaud the discussion you guys have had on the topic because I've read some of your other interviews. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy moving forward when it comes to AI and usage of it?
Yeah, my philosophy is we're not gonna use AI anymore. I don't have the need to do it anymore. You know, when I first built the Roottrees Are Dead, I was trying to do it very quickly, and there are bad artists out there, and then there's, like, a tier below that, and that's where I sit. The only thing that I'm good at art-wise is, like, remixing things that other people have done, and so I think in one of the articles we wrote or that we worked with about AI, Robin mentioned I think he brought this up and I agreed with him, and is that the original version of Roottrees wouldn't exist without AI.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons is that the art style in the first version of the game that I made, and maybe even the concept of the game being about looking through documents and placing people on a family tree, might have come from the fact that right at that time, my friend was showing me Midjourney. He's like, hey, look, I can generate people.
Mm.
Oh, that's interesting. And they look close enough to real people that at a quick glance, they look like photos. And these are people that don't exist. Now, before that, there was a website for the longest time. I don't remember when it first popped up, but it's been around for a very long time called thispersondoesnotexist.com. Gosh, I hope I have that URL right. I hope I'm not leading people like kind of virus or something. I think it's called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And that's been around probably when I was back in college or right after that, which is a long time ago now. And it's like, hey, here's a bunch of people that we made up that look like real photos that you can use for your UI or whatever. And so when Midjourney came out, I saw it as an evolution of that. They're like, hey, look, now we can generate candid looking photos of people that don't exist. And I was like, this is really cool. I could build a game around the idea of looking through these photos of people. That's part of where Roottrees came from. There's a lot of places that it came from. Like I said, the searching of the internet for trivia, the fact that the theme of the game jam was called Roots, that was a huge factor. Is like, well, what can I do with that? Family tree. Okay. But the reason I had the confidence to build it quickly, if for such a complicated idea, was because I asked him, I was like, well, can you generate these quickly? He's like, yes. So I sent him a bunch of names of people and vague descriptions of how they would look and what their jobs were in some situations. And even occasionally I'd be like, well, I want this person to be working on a car or whatever, you know, that their job is a mechanic, but I want to make sure
Hmm.
that way I make sure them working on a car. And so that at the time was a tool that helped me have the confidence to even set out to make this in the first place because I'm not an artist. But at the same time, I was just building a game jam game. And then over time, I realized I actually have something here. And one thing that I never questioned, strangely enough, was I never said, "Well, I'm gonna redo the art," because for me, that was just sort of the locked in part. All the art that we generated within the first weekend was still in the final game with maybe 1 or 2 small exceptions. The final itch.io game. I need to be very clear here because people have accused us of the illustrations. They say, "Oh, that's the AI art." It's really not. The version that Robin made on Steam, there's no AI art. We replaced all of it. It's very important. We hired an artist. We meticulously went through each piece. We made sure we didn't, in some cases, even use the original art. Sometimes we did, but the AI art that was generated, most of the time, we gave Henning, who is our artist, complete free. He could change whatever he wanted. But to kind of take it back, the AI art that we generated within that first weekend really didn't change because I was so focused on the design, and the art was almost secondary to that because I am not an artist. So I didn't really think of it as an art heavy game. I thought of it as more like, okay, I want it to feel like you're looking through these real lives. And so I don't have the need to do that anymore. Eventually, throughout that process, I realized this is going to be a full game, but I can't sell it. It's
Mm.
very clear that this art was not built by me. I have a lot of artist friends, and as that debate began becoming a bigger and bigger deal on the internet, it's like, okay, this is stealing from a whole bunch of artists to make all this. And I was like, okay, I see where you're coming from. And so I'll never be able to sell this game. I would never feel good about it. And the question at that time for me became, all right, what do I do? Do I pay for art or do I release the game for free? And it felt like a huge gamble because I had no idea. But yes, people that I knew, my friends, were saying, "Hey, you have something here. This game's really interesting." But my friends have told me that before. They're my friends for a reason. We're all on the same wavelength. They might go, "Okay, you have this is really interesting." Maybe they wouldn't have said like, "This is going to be a smash success." But I even had friends that told me that about Roottrees. I'd been spending more time on it. They're like, "Well, why aren't you working on the game you showed me last time? And why are you working on this instead? Because I'm not sure that this is as interesting." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I'm just getting this vibe that this will be important." So I had to make the decision that either I spend a lot of money and hire an artist and then potentially just lose a lot of money, which is what I was worried about. Because I've done that before. Not to dive too deep into it, but I have paid for art before on games that I was never able to even finish myself. Like, I got to the point where I was paying for the art, I was enjoying the art a lot, and then I realized that the art was almost too good for what I was making, and that if I wanted to keep that quality level, I'd have to pay for a lot of art, and this already Roottrees has so much art in it.
It has a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I don't think I could justify spending a whole bunch of money on a game that I'm just a person. I have no way of marketing it. I have no way of knowing if other people will care about this. It is a heavily text based game, which has been not the best formula for me in the past. And so I decided, well, in that case, because I've spent so much time and effort writing this, I'll just put it out there for free and I'll send it to the people that I think would enjoy it most. Those are people that liked Oberdin. And so I went to the Oberdin subreddit. I eventually released the game, but again, I didn't charge for it. I released it to the Oberdin subreddit. I released it to a puzzle game subreddit. I did send it to some people on forums that I was part of. I posted it on LinkedIn, I think, of all places. And because I don't know, I just posting it wherever I could. I was like, please, for the love of God, someone play this game that I built for the last year. And then luckily people did. But if I had known that people would play it, which I had no way of knowing, if I had known people would play it, there would have been two big things I would have done. I would have made the interface better. A lot of the things that Robin and I did for the Steam version were based on ideas that I already knew, like, well, if this was a better game, it would have a better interface in these methods. Now, I'm not the best programmer, but I would have hacked something together that's like, okay, for the drop downs, you could search a name. I probably wouldn't have changed the note taking system. That was one of the things that I think the end game, we've already talked about that a lot. It came out great, but that's not something I was focused on. The things I was more focused on were doing the basic things that you have to do in the game. The biggest one, the lowest hanging fruit by far, was those giant drop downs for all the names in the game. Those sucked. So I would have changed that, and I would have obviously replaced the art. If I knew that this was going to be as successful as it was, Those are the two things I would have done in advance, but I had no idea. And even after the game came out, it wasn't that I had regretted not doing those things because I had no way of knowing if the game would have been successful if it cost money. It was very successful because it was free and you could play it in browser. But that doesn't always translate to like, okay, well
To
now
sales, yeah.
yeah. So when Robin came to me and was like, "Hey, I'd like to remake the game. All we'll replace all the art, we'll pay for that, and then we'll release it to Steam." I believe I was like, "Are you sure you wanna do this?" Like, I don't know if the game especially now that the game's out there, are people even gonna pay for it? Is that even possible? It's gonna be free for all time. We came to that conclusion very quickly, but it all ended up working out for the best. But everything I just said is to say that now, moving forward, I don't have that need anymore. I have confidence that at the very least, the things that Robin and I put out together we can say from the creators of the Roottrees are dead, and soon we'll be able to say from the creators of the Roottrees are dead and the incident at Galley House. We have an audience of people that are interested in what we're going to do. We are the furthest from the people that have any need to ever touch AI ever again.
Yeah, like why would you when you can work with a talented artist? You know, like why would you do it? I guess some people still would, but it's like even if you ignore the ethical or environmental concerns which are real, I just think it's generally not that good. Like it's also not a good product. Now maybe that'll change in time, maybe it'll look better. I guess I have seen some good AI art, but at that point you've prompted it so much and spent so much time on it that it's like you could have just used an art, you know, at some point. There's so many talented people out there. So, yeah, I fully agree. One thing I have said is that like there is a certain person who's come onto our Steam discussion forum or whatever and been like, this game did have AI in it. I understand that the Steam version does not, but because it did, I can't support this because there's a foundation of AI. And honestly, Jeremy said about reviews, like if your review is that the game has too much text, like I'm fine with that. Like in fact, I respect your principles. Like if you're like if you're like this is my principle and I can't play anything even if you've ripped out the AI, you know, and you've done all that, and I still won't play it, like, I think that's valid. Like, I can't really disagree with that point of view. But obviously, I don't feel that way, or I wouldn't have wanted to propose, you know, ripping out the AI and redoing the game from scratch. But we got a really good game, in my opinion, out of it. We did create something really cool, and like Jeremy said, it wouldn't have existed without it. So I think that is some food for thought, and it's kind of up to the individual person as to like where they stand on that issue.
I really appreciate your candor on the topic.
You're
Thank you
very
for
welcome.
that.
We've got a couple of heavy spoiler questions for you, so we will launch into the official spoiler zone.
It's like the splash zone.
I can't believe you listened to a podcast for an hour and not have played it, but maybe there's someone.
That'll happen sometimes.
You know, at SeaWorld, they have the splash zone. This is the splash zone of knowledge.
Ooh.
Yes. So my favorite part is every mystery developer, everyone loves when the players get that good aha moment, especially if you can hear them say it during testing. So how do you guys try and create these moments if you do?
Well, that's a good question because I don't know how to make those moments happen. So really, it becomes about trying to make things that are puzzles, like I mentioned before, burying the lead, and then seeing which things people latch onto the most, and then trying to build atop those. A really good example, we're in spoiler mode, right? Complete spoiler
Full
mode.
spoilers. Yep. Everybody's
right.
been warned.
People that played my original version of the game would search for things that I didn't have any good results for. And they'd feel really clever searching for those things, and it would pop up and say, nothing found. So you know how I use that? I would just find something to put there if you did that. And that's an aha moment for, if 1/5 of my playtesters thought to search for this thing that I didn't have something cool for, and I add something cool for it, now maybe 1/5 of the players in the world search for that thing and they have an aha moment that I basically ripped off of a playtester. So that's one way to do it. You pay attention to how people play your game and you see what they're doing and you try and reward that. The things that make them feel clever can easily be moments for disappointment for one playtester. But then if I make that lead to something cool, it's no longer a moment of disappointment. It's a moment of everyone feels clever. I think that for me, the puzzle that I feel people are the most clever when they do it is when they kind of jump to a conclusion. They have partial information, they jump to a conclusion, and they are rewarded for that. The biggest example of that, and I wish I remembered the full history of how this came to be, but there's something that says Volume 2 in the game.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
The Sweet History of Candy Volume 2. And I think originally, if I know myself, I just put Volume 2 there because I thought it was fun. Like, oh, Volume 2. Ha ha ha. Like, there's this stupid fake book series out there of the history of candy, and what you need is in Volume 2 because that just implies that there's a Volume 1. And I was like, wait, that just implies that there's a Volume 1. What if I had something there in that implication? And when people find that, it's a clever moment for them. But I think it came from that clever moment of me going, wouldn't it be fun to make a Volume 2 of a series that in real life probably doesn't need multiple volumes, the history of candy? And so adding that, I felt clever as a designer. And then when people found it in the game, they felt clever as well. So unfortunately, there's no trained way that I do it on purpose. I just kind of, as I'm building the game, I'm like, oh, it'd be interesting. And then I just explore that.
As you were saying that, I was thinking like we've been working together. Like, well, we've pretty much finished a second game and we've had a lot of calls. And I don't remember ever talking about focusing on the aha moment as a goal for these games. Like, I think it's cool. And I think like in a puzzle game, like when you feel like you've solved something, that's cool. But like, does the locking in count as an aha moment? Like when you get that slowed down version of the Roottrees theme and it like blocks in the 5 things, like the 3 things, like is that an aha moment? Because we have talked about rewarding the player, like confirming that they did the right thing. But in terms of having the player go, oh, aha, I'm so smart, like I don't know that that's a goal of ours, is it?
I mean, it's a goal of mine, but I can't set out to do it. So you mentioned that we've had a lot of conversations, which is true.
Yeah.
We talk constantly. And so you probably can attest to the fact that sometimes at 3 in the morning, I'll write a crazy post on our internal forums. It's like, hey, I had this crazy idea last night. And oftentimes those ideas don't make it into the game, but occasionally they do. And those
Yeah.
are the moments where I'm like, I was thinking about this thing and my brain said, oh, wouldn't it be neat if? And then instead of it just being a wouldn't it be neat if, I started iterating on that idea in my head and going, well, how can this become something? I do that a lot, probably too much. But
Well,
those I think are the aha moments that when I'm like, oh, this would be so cool. I think that there is a percentage of people out there that if we were to implement every single one of those, there would be some percentage of people that would find every single one of those things cool. The
right.
question is, when do we need to know when it's the right percentage that it's worth doing instead of just being the 2 people in the world that think exactly like me that go, oh, that's neat. And then like 99% of people will go, okay, whatever.
Well, maybe I'm being pedantic because we do talk a lot about that feels cool or would be cool. We probably say that constantly. What is a cool feeling? Or if something happened in the game and that felt cool, like we definitely lean into that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it.
Is that the same as an aha moment? I don't know. For me, there's a difference.
I think it's when the player comes to a realization, especially if it recontextualizes things they've seen in the past but didn't put together. Like,
Right.
I'll use my example. For me, it's the moment you learn that Gwyneth has a lisp.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because before that, you've been digging around. You heard she was talking about Beth. There was a secretary called Beth Knox or a farm worker, I forget. So you're trying to go down this rabbit hole, but you never really end up finding anything. And it's like, all right, well, most of the secretaries aren't in the spider search. So while I'm not getting any hits, that doesn't really rule anything out. And then later you come across this piece of information and it's just this sort of light bulb moment of, wait, that's Bess,
Mhm.
not Beth. There was a Bess that was mentioned earlier that seemed like a red herring or a piece of fluff. Hang on. And then you go back there, and the minute you type that in, and suddenly you get an explosion of information, just feels amazing.
Well, that was definitely deliberately done that way.
Yes. In fact, I think that in a weird way, if you think about it, it's almost an awkward thing to try and put into a game where you're reading first person accounts. I had to find a way because you're not listening to people. I had to find a way to introduce the concept that someone called someone else Beth. So it is a little awkward, like that someone wrote a book and wrote that their kid once said that there's a rumor that like someone called Beth was being argued about. That is a very roundabout, strange thing that probably wouldn't be in any book, right? But I added it, and it was because I was like, well, that's something we haven't done is, the people mishearing something based on a speech issue. I was like, well, what name could even work? I was like, well, I need two names that are the same, but one uses an S sound and one uses a TH sound. And so I tried for a while, and I think the only one I could come up with was Bess and Beth. And what's funny is when I did that, this was really early on in Roottree Mania when we weren't sure if you're going to be finding individual first and last names or if it's going to be like the main game where it's all the names are full names. My original concept was we were going to have a bunch of full names, but there's going to be a bunch of red herrings in there. A lot of people don't notice it, but people definitely have. There's a lot of Elizabeths and Beths in the game.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot, more than there should be. And the trick was that it was going to be Bess. But when you saw Beth, I wanted you to look through the list and find like 3 or 4 people that it could have been. So there's Beth Knox. We might have even changed some of them. One of the plane crash victims was a Beth something or other. She had died of a heart attack. There was at least one other Beth or Elizabeth. There's a couple Elizabeth, I think. And
Mhm.
so I put so many Elizabeths and Beths into the game to kind of distract you from the idea that Bess was the Beth that you need. I would say that yes, I did that all intentionally, and I'm so glad that it resonated with you. But that's an example of a situation where I couldn't quite make it work as perfectly as I wanted it to because I think a lot of people solve it without that.
Ah,
Because the mechanics of the game, in a way, let the game down a little bit in the sense that anytime you find a picture of anyone, it's going to be used. Anytime you find any picture of a person in the game that you can click on and get their portrait, it will be used on the tree. So people find that statue of Bess, they click it, and they know, okay, she has to go on the tree. And a lot of people just place her the only place that it makes sense that she goes, and they like miss out on the whole Bess revelation.
I had the revelation before the statue.
Interesting.
So that's how perfect world, it happens that way, and it creates that aha moment. But for a lot of people in reality, it doesn't. I've watched people play the game, and I would say maybe
Maybe 50-50?
I would almost say probably 10 to 15% of the people.
But to circle back to cool stuff, like there's cool in sense of a puzzle, but then there's also just cool things. Like I like popping in things that just maybe the player tries just something random and then it works. I think that's cool, even if it's not necessarily part of the game. Like I listened to the podcast you both did on the Roottrees, but did you find Family Dooku, for example?
I did not.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I was made aware of its existence later, but never went back to it.
Well, this is spoilers, but there's a mini game in the game called Family Dooku.
The Sudoku puzzle. Yes, I did that.
Yeah. So it's a family tree Sudoku thing, which is Jeremy's initial idea for the Roottrees Are Dead, but we put it in as a mini game. And that game's interesting in that I don't believe there's any clues for it that you can naturally find throughout the internet or the family tree. Like we established the grammar of the game is like you're using the computer and you're using the family tree and that's it. But the Family Dooku comes from you just at some point, like you might look over at the stereo clock or you'll see it in a cutscene. And there's a shelf of books there that you can look at. And one of them is Family Dooku. And if you just search, you're like, oh, I wonder what that book is. So that to me is a cool moment because it's outside of the game. And like a user might think like, what if I just tried randomly searching stuff in the room? And actually, if you do that, you'll find descriptions for everything. Now, most of them don't.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, most of them don't lead to anything. Most of them are, again, dead ends. But like, you can look up what a Riot Girl is and what that era was. You can look up the notorious Montjoys, which is a family tree that we made up. And then there's like, yeah, but Family Dooku actually leads to a thing. And I love that kind of thing. If we're talking about spoilers, there's an achievement we have that people hate actually called Call Screener.
Yes, I got that up by accident. That's how I found out about the Sudoku because I was like, "There's a phone. I just got an achievement. What just happened?"
Yeah, because it's like the phone call was in the original game, right, Jeremy? But it was like you didn't click to answer it, if I recall.
Yeah, it just happened.
So in this version, we had to add a hallway and a phone you could pick up and stuff like that. And it was your idea. You were like, what if they just don't pick up the phone and you make it ring a bunch of times and then an answering machine picks it up? And I loved that. And I'm like, we're putting this in the game. And it's basically the same phone conversation. It's just left in message form. And then you get the call screener.
Voicemail, yeah.
But it turns out a lot of people hate it because I didn't realize this, but a lot of people consider achievements like not just like we had a variety of different kinds of achievements, but that's one that you have to do at a specific moment in the game. Like you can't quickly open the game and get to it.
And you can't just do it by restarting. Like you can't start a new save and get to it immediately. You have to play for a while. I think that's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
It's okay probably to put in an achievement that you could get if you just restarted a new save file and like within 10 seconds you did something, then it's probably okay. But this one, you have to get 12 names locked in or something before the phone rings, something like that.
Yeah. I think that's cool, and like I've resisted all the haters who have complained to me about it because I've been like, maybe my mind will change over time, but I don't think an achievement is something you are entitled to get easily, like or be able to do once you've looked it up. Like I don't know, like it's rewarding you doing a fun thing, and that's cool to me, not necessarily an aha moment.
I mean, I achieved it through incompetence,
I like that.
and it got me to Family Dooku.
Yeah, there you go.
I saw the bookshelf and never thought of searching for Family Dooku.
Yeah, and you don't have to. And if you don't, you'll miss a whole mini game, which I think is actually a lot of fun. Some people have asked us to spin it off, but I think it's really cool. And I remember reading an article about, like, one game I quite like, which isn't a puzzle game, is Elden Ring. And that's a really big game. And there's so many dungeons and there's so many things. And I read this article that was like, I forget the name of the designer of, is it Miyazaki? I think it might be like the cartoon.
Yes, same
guy.
last name.
Same last name.
Different family, maybe.
Yes. And it was like, he doesn't care if you see everything in the game or not. And I was like, that's a really interesting philosophy, because traditional game design says like, no, if you make a cool thing, if you make a lava field, if you spend the time building that out, you have to make sure every player sees it. It has to be in the main loop. But he's like, no, I don't care. And so much of Elden Ring, like, you don't have to go to that temple and see that thing. And I'm like, I think that's cool. Like, as long as the base game does offer you a good experience, you can add these things that people can talk about and be like, did you know there's a whole mini puzzle game? And people will be like, what? And then they boot the game up again. And I think that's, well.
It's interesting that comes in a way, oh boy, maybe this will be controversial, but that comes from a place of game development privilege. Because like I worked on games where the team was small,
Yeah.
the scope was large, and any content that you make, like, because we need to make the game as long as possible for people to feel like it's worth it for what we're giving them. So
Mhm.
you can't just make content that people might not ever see, because then you're basically wasted the time of the development team, is how it felt. So like the fact that Elden Ring is so massive and had so many people working on it, you can afford to like make things that not everyone will see. But if you're trying to build a massive game, like I've worked at a studio I'd consider we were like a double A studio, where we're trying to make games that compete with AAA games and feel very big and epic and interesting, but with a smaller team. And that's where that comes from. You can't make anything that the average user would probably not see, because then the game's smaller for most people, I
I
guess.
guess that's true. Like, if it would be different maybe if Roottrees was barely a 3-hour game or something like that, then I might have insisted we put it on the main path. But knowing that most people could play the base game for 7-8 hours or something like that, then it's like, okay, well, they've got enough game. This is bonus content, so I don't care.
Yeah, I guess it's not just a percentage thing, but the fact that the game feels meaty without it. And so we have the ability and time for us to add these extra little fun bonus things that people might not see. And I would say that the whole game is kind of full of that, right?
Yeah.
There's so much. This is the Elden Ring of text-based internet search.
Honestly, in
games,
some ways it is. It really is.
because there's so many little articles that there's enough little articles that people might not ever find, that we made like a scavenger hunt for our Discord at some point, because there was some articles I'm pretty sure nobody had found. I was like, I wrote all this, I want someone to find it. So we like made hint chains for people to follow to find content that wasn't important to the story, but I thought was fun.
Yeah.
And so that's because we had so much extra content like Elden Ring, but in text form.
Well, you wrote so much of it, but then I was able to throw in some. Like, if you had a team of 5 writers writing out text documents, you could really fill out a world. But I guess that's a double-edged sword. If you made it so big and so much text, then again, we talked about the attention and the signal to noise ratio. You want to keep it interesting, unless it's like a niche side thing.
Yeah, I think generally we tried to keep, if you go down a side path, we try and end it pretty quick,
Yeah.
or make it very clear that you're on a side path very quickly.
You're like, this white squirrel isn't going to be important to the game. If you're reading about a white squirrel, that's just a joke, and that's what I like. Because one thing we actually haven't talked about on this call is that you and I both love comedy a lot. And even though our next game is pretty much devoid of it, there's some jokes, but like Roottrees, almost every dead end is a joke in some form or another. And that's a really fun exercise.
Is that why there's the Seinfeld achievement?
It's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So confused on
That was your idea, Jeremy, right?
it was, and I think it was an accident. I think that I had put in the name Seinfeld because, sometimes people in real life have the same last name as someone who's famous. Like, it just happens sometimes. So I was like, well, that's realistic. I'll toss that in. And then I had a different Jerry, And I was like, "Oh, that's funny because now that we've split up the fact that first and last names are separate, you can put a Jerry Seinfeld on the tree. That's just a funny moment. So
Mhm.
what if we reward people that did that?" I almost decided to add a couple more sitcom people and then make that the achievement, but, it was enough. Just doing it once
Yeah.
was enough.
That's one of those ones that you kinda have to look up.
Yeah.
Like, the game is sold well enough now that out of all the people who've played it, there's probably someone who just did it. But
Oh, and that person is gonna feel amazing
yeah.
And
when
I
they got
think
that.
that it stands out. When people see that last name being Seinfeld, I think that there's some last names that you just can't use anymore without people thinking of a certain person.
Mhm.
Mm.
Well, I'll tell you, I never think about this guy from my high school. I haven't thought about him in 20 years, but his last name was Epstein, and now I've thought a lot about what his life must
Oh,
be like.
no.
Like, does he wanna change his name? You know what I mean? Like, anyway.
I do wanna ask, what's up with Miracle's eye patch?
Oh, I mean, there's
That was
not much to
bugging
it.
me.
There's not much to it. It's just so I'm not a medical expert by any means, but I do know that premature children and late birth children can lead to medical issues. And that was just my way of, he was a miracle baby, but he was born really late in his mother's life. And that can lead to health issues. And I don't know if eye issues are one of those things, but I know personally someone who was born pretty premature and he has ear issues. And so I
Mm.
think I chose, rather than using that exact thing, I was like, well, eye issues are more easily visually noticeable. Like I could put hearing aids on a person, but in a picture that might be hard to see. But an eye patch is not hard to see for
True.
sure. And so later, I essentially made him mostly blind. And so later he's wearing the more traditional dark sunglasses that someone who's blind, especially someone like him who I feel like he'd probably try and hide that
Yeah.
fact. Not like hide it fully, but like, not call attention to it. And so that's just where that came from. There's nothing special to it. I think that if I were a kid and I had eye issues, I think I'd want to wear an eye patch and be a pirate. I think. I don't know. But maybe not. If you're a kid, it's probably the thing that you're,
Sensitive? Yeah.
sensitive about. So maybe not. But I did think it created a really, and I'll be honest, that might have come from the AI originally because we wrote that
Ah.
he has eye issues, and so, like, maybe it just decided that this kid was gonna have an eye patch. That's quite possibly what happened there, and then that became, people, especially children in the original AI version of the game, all the children are creepy looking. November Roottree, we made fun of it later. That's the one we didn't carry the AI art over, I wanna be very clear, but the one thing we made fun of the AI art in the Steam version is in Roottree Mania, there's a part where it's like the educate to you logo. They're like, "Oh, that creepy kid used to laugh at the end, and I used to rush to my TV to turn off." That comes from a mix of things that, like, people have these irrational fears when they're kids of,
Mhm.
like, of things that happen after TV shows because something's creepy. But that joke came directly from, if you look at the Educate to You logo that we put as like a watermark on one of the photos, it's a drawn representation of what the original version of November Roottree looked like, the creepy kid that the AI generated. And that was an Easter egg slash inside joke for us.
I'm gonna have to go look at that after the call.
Go for it.
I think the original was horrifying, honestly. I'm in that camp.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is it's less horrifying because, like I said, I'm not a good artist, but I can Photoshop things.
Mhm.
And if you look at the original version that AI generated and the horrifying version that exists currently, the horrifying version is the less horrifying version of the
Yeah.
2.
That doesn't surprise
Ooh.
me.
A deep piece of lore there. Something I always like to ask developers. You've sort of talked about this a bit already, but what is something you would change either in the game or about making the game if you had the opportunity to?
I would say I would have more photos. We could not at the time afford to pay for art that wasn't going to be, this kind of ties back into the conversation. That's a thing, Robin. You said that, oh, we should add content that no one will ever see. You and I discussed we were not going to pay for art.
Oh,
We could
yeah.
not pay for art that no one would see because
It's true.
that's where
Yeah.
the cost comes from.
Text I
And
considered
so,
free essentially because it was just our time, right? But art,
yes,
we were paying an artist essentially by complexity of the piece. So if there's more people in it, it was more expensive.
I think the biggest change I would have red herring art for characters. Red herring art for characters that isn't used on the tree that you would have to find a way to sort through so that it wasn't immediately clear when you clicked on a face that had to be someone on the tree somewhere. Maybe like an extra 5 or 10 characters or something. And then
like
that way, we'd eliminate one of the problems I feel with the design, which is certain aha moments can't be made because you don't need to make them because you bypass them because you just know, oh, I already have a picture, so this person's going to be important. So I wrote some content with maybe thinking of that in mind, like the Roottree Everywhere stuff that happened in Roottree Mania. There's two other people that are mentioned. There's one from France. He's like the president of the Roottree France's wife was gonna be someone that potentially Guy would have slept with, and then the other one was from Australia, I believe. She never had kids. I can't remember her name, but those were people I introduced with the idea that if we would have red herring art in the future, we would make art for them. So you wouldn't know of these 4 Roottree Everywhere people, which of the 4 actually went on the tree, because it wouldn't fit all of them.
ooh, yeah, that would be really cool.
You could have portraits of yourself made. Well, you have that for yourself for media.
That's interesting what you said about the art. I was putting in my personal money to do the art. That was the biggest investment. Like I considered my time free, which is not fair, but that's a lot of game developers do that. I'm like, I'm sitting around anyways. This time is free. But for art, we actually had to pay and voice acting for Roottrees. That's like almost all the money, but the voice acting was very small compared to the art. So that was quite a limiting factor. And then once we committed to do Roottree Mania, that was like another 50%. And I think even Roottree Mania, we tried to limit it a lot. And even like things like the shape of the family tree in Roottree Mania come out of trying to keep the art on the cheaper side because it was the most expensive and the riskiest thing. Because like Jeremy was saying earlier, like there was no guarantee this thing was going to make any money. And in fact, I was prepared, to lose all the money, and it would have been a huge bummer, by the way. But I was like, I could do this once. My wife was on board and I was like, okay, but if this loses all the money, I'm never doing this again. I'm only ever going to make the cheapest looking games you've ever seen in your life. And now, like, hindsight is 2020. Like, if we knew how successful the game would have been, then I would have happily contracted a bunch more art, and things like music. Like, we use a lot of royalty-free music, and it would have been nice to have more songs. Like, one of my favorite parts of the Roottrees Are Dead is all the bespoke songs that we have in there, and like that fit into the game world and all that stuff. I would have loved to have more of those. But it's like, it's hard to say regret because like the information we had at the time was that, let's not push our luck here. Let's make this as lean as we can to get the game we want done. So I don't really have many regrets. But if I knew the future, then I think I would have said, let's do more art and let's do maybe some more passes on some of the art and like some stuff like that.
And you did, by the way.
We did. Yeah, we redid the sisters. That was an interesting one because the sisters picture was like the first one we ever did. And as you find out with, we have a great relationship with Hennig. Like he's the artist on the incident at Galley House. So we've worked with him now on 2 projects that both have a fair amount of art. And you kind of get better at working with someone as they go along. And they also get better because they learn what you're looking for and stuff. So the Roottree was the first key picture, but it was also the first one he did. And I really did notice that by the time we got to the end of the Roottree Mania art, like he had improved a lot in his style and being able to get exactly what we want. And we were never as happy with that first piece of art. So when the game came out and sold well, like in its first month or so, first few weeks, I was like, hey, let's redo this art. And we circled back. And again, I think there's other pieces that I think I wasn't as happy with that I think we would have circled back on if we do, that it would have been done well. But I don't know. Overall, I'm like, honestly,
That one was so important to the game. Like,
Yeah.
it's the first thing you see. It's also in the trailer.
yeah,
It's also
everywhere.
on Steam. But that's the type of thing where I would argue that you and I said, okay, well, the art is done. Let's not replace it because the amount of money that it costs to like replace, we're not sure that it's worth it yet. And then when the game came out, it was worth it
Yeah, exactly.
easily.
But if not, we would have, shipped the game and been happy. And you could see how we've changed with our second game, like having more money around and it like alleviates some of the risk. So we can be like, we have some crazier ideas, let's do it. And by the way, you said privilege earlier, like that's a huge privilege, but it also is a bit of a curse. Like sometimes it is better to have more limitations, right? So it's a constant struggle. Like you don't want to creep the scope too much. You want to make the best game you can within reasonable limitations and a reasonable amount of time. And that involves a lot of just like a million little decisions.
Yeah, well, let's move on to your next game. So we're deliberately keeping John a little bit in the dark, not having him play Type Help first, so we can compare the experience. But he has played Red Pearls of Borneo, which was directly inspired by Type Help. So conceptually, we don't need to worry about that. So what's the pitch for people who've not yet played Type Help? How would you pitch Galley House to them?
I'd pitch it as a different type of detective game where, it's funny, I had something for this. I definitely wrote this up somewhere, and now I have to try and recall how well I wrote it before poorly. The way that I'd pitch it is that in games like Roottrees and Oberdin, you are using an external system, research, whether that be looking at the past, whether it be looking on the internet, and then apply what you find to a document of some sort. In Type Help and now the incident at Galley House, what you're doing is assembling your research method as you research. So you are using a machine to listen to parts of a story. And in that story, as you listen to parts of it, you find context clues for how to find more of the story. So the method of research leads you to more content, which leads to more research, which leads to more content, which leads to more research. The two systems are not separated from one another. Imagine if in Oberdin, filling in the book gave you the memories. It doesn't do that. Those two things are
Yeah.
separated. And same thing with Roottree. Imagine filling in the tree. Perhaps someone on the tree invented the new internet, and now you have internet 2, which is even better. Now, it's nothing like that, but in Type Help and Galley House, that's more the structure of the game, and it feels very different, but it still exercises the same brain muscles in a very satisfying way.
It certainly fits in the genre of, the locking in things, but just the way you do it feels different. But I think there's a secondary layer as well. It's not just, I think you're exactly right. You're revealing more of the story and seeing it unfold, but then you're also in your head trying to piece together a mystery, right? And you can only piece together the mystery by viewing those scenes or that story that is unlocked. And you can build a mental model in your head of what has happened and then, to solve the mystery. So there's two layers there. Type Help is a text game, like purely text game. So we've discussed like whether this is a remaster. It's easy to go to that word, but like if Roottrees felt like a remaster and that like the interface was very close to one, like we talked about all these enhancements we did to it, but it was still clicking with your mouse, typing on a keyboard, still had a board and stuff like that. But Type Help was just text, and we've given it, graphical user interface and 3D environments. And when you watch the story unfold, it's like a visual novel. I think it's much more like of an adaptation than it is a remaster because it's changing the format of the story. Like the story's the same, but you're experiencing it in a much more different way.
We've compared it to when someone makes a movie of a
Yeah,
book.
exactly.
Sometimes they'll cut things, sometimes they'll add things because the medium that they're telling the story is a little bit different. Now, oftentimes there are people that really, really like a book and say, oh, the movie isn't as good. But the people that haven't read the book, sometimes they'll watch the movie first and then they'll go read the book and they go, oh, well, I like what the movie did here. So
Yeah.
the two things usually stand apart from one another. And I believe that there will be people that really, really like Type Help and then they play Galley House and they say, well, I don't know that it necessarily needed to do this or not. But then I'm also positive that there will be people that play Galley House first. And if they go back and play Type Help, they'll go, oh, well, it didn't have some of these things that I actually really liked. As we've changed the narrative structure of how we're telling the story compared to how Type Help did, there are changes that we've had to make. I can speak in very vague terms here. Type Help is kind of like her story in the sense that you're looking through a computer database, and the computer database is full of text files that help you learn the story. And those text files have already been pre-compiled, pre-sorted by a different person. In Galley House, we've switched that entirely so that you are the person I would call the initial investigator.
Ah,
And so there's no person that has been here before you for you to read their notes in addition to what they've found. So we did have to make some changes. And I
Yeah.
think that people that play our game first might go back and go, oh, well, it's so odd to have this almost disconnect from the events of the game. But I'm not sure. There's no way of us knowing in advance. As far as I'm concerned, we made a really cool game. I'm seeing people play test it. I've been play testing it every day, and I think it's awesome. But it's different.
Yeah.
They're different from one another.
And if someone tells me, like a recent movie I can think of is like Project Hail Mary, I really liked the book and then I actually really liked the movie. But if someone told me I went to see Project Hail Mary, it's nothing compared to the book, I wouldn't be like, you have the wrong opinion. Like it's like, it's really hard to compete with your imagination and things like that. And it's a very different experience. So someone on Blue Sky said to me is like, I don't see how they're going to improve Type Help because Type Help is already really good. And I don't see it, honestly. I straight up don't see it as improving type help. And that might be weird because you're like, well, why would you do it? And it's like, it's not about that. It's about creating a different version of it that is the same thing in a different way. You know what I mean? Like, I love acting. I love movies and TV and drama. And when I played type help, I wanted to hear the people saying it. I wanted that more than anything. That was kind of my main purpose for wanting to work on this project. And we got to do that. We got to hire voice actors for every role. And there's a certain kind of player who will never play a text game, no matter what. Like, it's just like, it's just too daunting. They'll just see that text game, that black background with the text on it, and they'll be like, I can't do this. And Galley House gives them the opportunity to experience this story in a much more like AV, kind of way. Like, you're seeing things on the screen, you're hearing it, it's like more visually stimulating, I would say. But is that better? No, it's not better. It's different. And I think that, like Jeremy said, like, I think we've created something cool. And my goal is to expose this really cool story to a much bigger audience because, it's on Steam and it doesn't have that hurdle of the text-based one. But like with Roottrees, we're never taking that away. Like, type help is always going to exist. I don't believe in removing stuff from the internet. My goal is like always keep stuff up as long as possible. And that's going to be absolutely true for type help. So people don't have to decide. They can play both,
Awesome.
It will be very interesting because I know that your guys' experiment is one of you played type help already, one of you hasn't. So I would love to hear if you guys agree with what we've set out to do. That,
Okay.
After you play Galley House, it would be so interesting for me for you to go back and play type help and see the differences.
I can definitely do that.
Now, we've had testers that have done both, and it's interesting to see. Like, generally,
We haven't had testers that have started with Galley House and gone backwards.
No, we have not. That's true. But we've had testers who have played type help and Galley House, and we've had testers who have come in not having played type help.
I really like the idea of bringing the game into sort of a new medium of storytelling, because even though text is fine for me, I get that it won't work for other people. Like, my specific line is, I'm really bad with text parsers. That's the daunting wall I can't get over. Like, great examples for Kenophobia.
Yeah.
I can't play the game. I've tried repeatedly and just bounce off every time. And it's just because of that specific formatting for me. And it's great to be able to bring, the good parts of the game to someone who wouldn't otherwise be able to see it.
One thing we couldn't do with Roottrees was make it work well on a controller. Like, we tried and we were never able to do it. And this game does work on a controller. So we now have a version of type help that you can play on a Steam Deck. That's something you couldn't do
I
before.
was just about to ask that because generally I try to play on a Steam Deck just to give us something else, something different to talk about for different mediums.
Yeah. So this one fully works on that. Now, I will say our team, like, we love our mouse and keyboard. And that's the way we mostly interact. Like, I'm building the game in Godot with a mouse and keyboard. So that interface definitely has the most polish right now. And hopefully by launch, I get the controller even better. But it is fully playable from beginning to end with controller already. I just think, there's always room for improvement.
That's what patches are for.
Yeah. But, it's tricky to get an interface that feels smooth. And a lot of these mystery games just don't support controller at all.
Yeah.
Right? You can see
Makes
why.
sense.
Galley House is coming out July 14th, which is planned to be about a week after this is published, podcasting God's willing.
Cool.
What platforms will it be available on?
Steam at first.
Yeah.
Potentially other places in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. Yeah, and on Steam, like Roottrees, it'll be Windows, Mac, Linux, and Steam Deck. Actually, that's unlike Roottrees, but yeah, we support all major computer platforms and the Steam Deck for this game.
That's awesome. We will have the link to that in the show notes, and you can go and wishlist it today.
Yeah.
So where can people find you on the internet?
I'm Evil Trout on most sites. On Blue Sky is probably my preferred platform. I'm at eviltrout.com is my name.
I am someone who doesn't have a lot of social media presence as my official persona of the developer of Roottrees. I don't really post in that capacity. The only place that I kind of do that occasionally is Reddit. So if you go look at the subreddit for Oberdin or the subreddit for puzzle games, you'll see posts from me occasionally, but that's just my personal account. I'm not a persona, I guess. So usually if I have something to say in an official capacity, I ask Robin to do it through the Roottrees accounts or Evil Trout accounts or Discord. We use our Discord a lot.
Yeah, we like our Discord.
Yeah.
It is a great community.
I'll have to join that later after this.
Please do.
Yeah. Well, a big thanks to the both of you for joining us today. It's been amazing to talk to you.
Okay, well, thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. You're very welcome.
All right. So you can find us on Blue Sky at Flatfoots and Fools, one word. You can join the Discord to talk about any detective games. Link will be in the show notes. The podcast is edited by Peter Crevier. Podcast art by Lolita Gross, and music is by Antonic Music. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.